A simple note left at a diner table transforms the life of a struggling single mom and sets off a chain of events no one could have imagined. The neon sign flickered outside the diner, a stubborn light refusing to go out completely, much like the woman who now pushed open the glass door. Her shoulders sagged from the weight of the day, the kind of weariness that sank deep into your bones. She was no stranger to long hours. The hospital had been understaffed for weeks, and she had grown accustomed to the grind. But tonight, she wasn't heading straight home to collapse on the couch. Tonight, she craved a quiet corner, a warm plate, and a chance to breathe. Inside, the diner hummed with soft chatter and the clinking of utensils. The air smelled of fried food and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. She slid into a booth near the window, where she could see the rain beginning to streak the glass. It wasn't cozy, but it was a break, a moment away from the relentless pace outside. It wasn't until she approached the table that she noticed the waitress. The young woman couldn't have been much older than 22, though her tired eyes and slumped posture made her seem older. A few strands of chestnut hair had escaped the ponytail she had hastily tied, and her uniform bore the stains of too many rushes and too little care. "Hi," the waitress said, her voice barely audible. She fumbled with her notepad, looking everywhere except at the woman. "What can I get you? Coffee to start?" "Yes, please," the woman replied, her voice steady and low. She could tell the waitress was holding back tears, and it made her chest tighten. She wasn't sure why it bothered her so much. Maybe it was the waitress's fragile composure, or maybe it was something else, but she couldn't ignore it. The waitress nodded quickly and turned away, but not before she saw her swipe at her face with her sleeve. The woman didn't look away. Something told her there was more to the waitress's story, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to know what it was. The waitress returned with the coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the cup in front of her. The woman noticed the faint smudges of ink on her fingers, the kind that came from scribbling notes in a hurry. Her eyes were red, barely holding back a flood of emotions she clearly didn't want anyone to see. "Anything else?" the waitress asked, her voice cracking just enough to betray her attempt at professionalism. The woman hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "Just the coffee for now." The waitress gave a quick nod, then turned to leave, but something about her movement seemed heavier, as if she carried a weight no one else could see. The woman watched her retreat behind the counter, where she leaned against the wall, staring blankly at the order slips pinned above the grill. She thought no one was watching, but the woman saw it all, the slight shudder of her shoulders, the quick dab at her eyes with the back of her hand. When the waitress came back a few minutes later, the woman decided to speak. "Rough night?" she asked casually, trying to sound more conversational than intrusive. The waitress froze for a moment, then offered a tight, forced smile. "Something like that." The woman could tell she wasn't used to anyone asking. Most people probably didn't notice or didn't care. "You seem tired," she said gently, her tone inviting rather than probing. "Maybe more than tired." The waitress's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a second, the woman thought she might brush her off. Instead, the waitress took a slow, shaky breath. "It's been a lot lately," she admitted quietly. "Too much, really." The woman nodded, letting her take her time. "You want to talk about it?" The waitress blinked, her surprise almost palpable. No. It's fine," she stammered, though the crack in her voice said otherwise. "I shouldn't. I mean, you're just here for coffee." "Sometimes," the woman said, "talking helps, even to a stranger." The waitress's lips pressed together, but then something in her seemed to soften. She glanced around the diner, ensuring no one was listening, and leaned slightly closer. "It's just," she began, struggling to find the words. "I'm working double shifts to keep things together. My daughter, she's 2. She needs so much, and her dad." She trailed off, shaking her head. "He's not in the picture anymore. I'm just trying to do it all, you know? But it feels like I'm failing." The woman listened intently, not interrupting, letting the waitress spill the words that seemed to have been bottled up for far too long. But as she spoke, the woman felt something stirring inside her, a sense that this moment, small and fleeting, might hold more significance than either of them realized. The waitress straightened quickly, as if embarrassed for saying too much. "Sorry," she mumbled, stepping back. "I didn't mean to unload all that. You don't need to hear it." The woman shook her head gently. "Don't apologize. Sometimes just saying it out loud can take the edge off." The waitress smiled faintly, though her eyes remained distant. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer now, almost as if she didn't expect kindness from a stranger. I should get back to work." The woman nodded, watching as she disappeared behind the counter again. This time, her movements seemed a little slower, like someone carrying the weight of invisible chains. As she sipped her coffee, the woman let her thoughts drift. The waitress's story wasn't unique. She'd seen that kind of struggle in others before, but something about her raw honesty and the way she tried to hold herself together tugged at her. She was young, too young to feel so defeated. Her mind wandered back to the years she'd spent clawing her way out of similar situations, working through nights, skipping meals, and relying on pure willpower to push forward. Life had never been easy, but she had learned that even the smallest acts of grace from others could make all the difference. The diner felt quieter now, the chatter fading into a dull background hum. She caught the waitress glancing over once, and she offered her a small, reassuring smile. The waitress quickly looked away, but not before the woman noticed a flicker of something. Maybe gratitude, maybe surprise. She finished her coffee, but didn't call for the check right away. Instead, she pulled a piece of paper from her purse and a pen from the counter. She stared at the blank page for a moment, unsure how to start. But then the words began to flow. This wasn't just about giving the waitress comfort. It was about planting a seed, something she could hold on to when the nights got even darker. The pen glided across the paper, her words forming with surprising ease. She didn't write anything elaborate, just a handful of sentences that came straight from the heart. They weren't about fixing her problems or offering empty platitudes. Instead, they spoke to resilience, to the quiet strength she already carried, but might not yet see in herself. She wrote about how even on the hardest days, showing up mattered, how the love she poured into her daughter was worth more than any paycheck. How she had seen her, really seen her, and believed she was doing better than she gave herself credit for. She folded the note carefully and tucked it under the edge of her empty coffee cup. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if this small gesture would even mean anything. But then she glanced back at the waitress behind the counter, still moving like a ghost of herself, and knew it was worth a try. As she slid out of the booth, the waitress noticed her and approached with the bill in hand. "I hope the coffee was okay," she said, her voice still faint but less shaky now. "It was just what I needed," the woman replied, holding her gaze for a moment before leaving the cash on the table. She motioned slightly toward the cup. "Take care of yourself," she added, her tone warm but firm, as if she were reminding the waitress of something important. The waitress furrowed her brow, glancing at the table as the woman walked out the door. The folded note caught her eye, and she reached for it cautiously, her fingers trembling as they unfolded the paper. Her breath caught as she read the words. They weren't grand or poetic, but they hit her with the force of a wave. She read them again, tears pooling in her eyes, not the kind born from frustration or exhaustion, but something gentler, something that soothed an ache she hadn't even known how to name. That night, when she tucked her daughter into bed, she felt a glimmer of hope, like maybe things could get better. Maybe she wasn't failing after all.